40 acres of Wyoming dirt. Nothing for miles but sage and wind and a sky too big to argue with. On a low-rise, a metal shed, corrugated steel, no windows, no name, the kind of structure you pass without a second glance. But underneath the floor, beneath a concrete slab triggered by a single bolt on a welding table, a staircase drops into the dark. At the bottom, a home, warm, lit, lived in, built by hand over 13 years by a man the world had already forgotten. On the desk, a photograph of a woman who died too young. Beside it, a voice recorder. The tape reads 2 words: "Play me." The voice belongs to a dead man, and what he says will unravel everything. The day Ren Mercer turned 18, the state of California stopped pretending. There was no cake, no handshake, no little ceremony where somebody looked him in the eye and said something that mattered. There was just a gray Tuesday morning in a building that smelled like floor wax and old coffee, and a manila envelope sliding across a laminate desk that had been scratched by 1,000 hands before his. The man behind the desk was named Patterson, Gerald Patterson. He had the face of someone who had made peace a long time ago with the distance between what this job was supposed to be and what it actually was. He was not a cruel man. He was tired. Tired in the way that builds up inside a person who has watched too many boys walk in scared and walk out hollow. The tiredness had settled into the lines around his eyes, into the flatness of his voice. A man who had learned to deliver information without feeling, because feeling meant he still had something left to give, and he did not. Ren did not look scared. He had not looked scared in a long time. He had figured out somewhere around the age of 10 that fear was a signal. You sent it out into the world, and the world had a way of answering it in ways you did not want. So he stopped sending it. He learned to carry his fear inward, to compress it into something dense, quiet, functional, something that did not show on the surface. He picked up the envelope without being asked. Inside, a birth certificate with a watermark he had never noticed before, a Social Security card in a plastic sleeve, $200 in cash, the bills slightly soft from handling, and a bus ticket. One way, destination, Covenant, Wyoming. He had never heard of it. "There is one more thing," Patterson said. He pulled a second envelope from the top drawer of his desk. Thick, cream-colored paper. A law firm's return address embossed in the upper left corner. Raised letters you could feel with your thumb. "This came for you 6 weeks ago," Patterson said. "We were holding it until today. Your grandfather passed, left you something out in Wyoming. That is where the bus is going." Ren looked at the envelope. His name was written on the front in handwriting he did not recognize. Small, precise, the letters leaning slightly forward, like the person writing them had been in the habit of economy, of not wasting space, not wasting anything. He knew the name Jonas Harlan, the way you know the name of a country you have never visited. It existed somewhere. It had geography, but it had no texture, no smell, no weight of lived experience behind it. His mother's father, a man who had taken him in after she died when Ren was 5 years old, and who had kept him for 6 months before surrendering him to the state. Surrendered. That was the word they used in the file. Like a white flag going down. Like something you do when you have decided that fighting is no longer worth the cost. Ren had stopped wondering about Jonas Harlan before he turned 12. You can only wonder about someone who let you go for so long before the wondering itself becomes the thing that hurts. So he stopped. He built a wall where the wondering used to be, and he moved on. "What did he leave me?" Ren asked, his voice flat, carrying none of the things he did not intend to show. Patterson looked at a note on his desk. Some land, 40 acres outside Covenant, undeveloped, and a structure, some kind of outbuilding. There are back taxes owed on the property. The lawyer's number is in the envelope. She said to call her when you got this. Ren folded both envelopes and put them inside his jacket, against his chest. He picked up his duffel bag. The same one he had carried between 7 different placements over 13 years, its canvas worn soft at the handles from all the times he had picked it up, and moved on. "Good luck," Patterson said. Wren walked out of the office, down the long corridor, through the double doors, into the California morning. He did not look back, not because he was being dramatic about it, simply because there was nothing behind him worth the energy of a final glance. He had learned that early. Looking back at places you were leaving only made the next place harder to settle into. You kept your eyes forward, your hands empty, your expectations low, and you moved. The bus station was 20 minutes away on foot. He walked it. He found a payphone near the ticket counter that still worked, which surprised him. He dialed the number on the law firm letterhead before he had fully decided to. The phone rang twice. The voice that answered was precise, professional, carrying the energy of someone who scheduled their days in 15-minute increments and did not appreciate deviation. Caldwell Law. "This is Nora Caldwell." He told her who he was. There was a short pause, the sound of a chair adjusting, papers moving. "Mr. Mercer, I have been expecting your call. I am sorry for your loss." He did not know how to respond to that. You did not mourn a ghost. You did not grieve for someone who had chosen to become a stranger. He skipped the condolence and went straight to the only thing that mattered. "The property," he said. Yes, she moved efficiently into it. 40 acres, approximately 20 miles outside Covenant in Fremont County. The county has a lien for unpaid property taxes. The total outstanding balance is just over $6,000. You have until the end of the month before the county begins seizure proceedings. He did the math in the time it took her to draw breath. $200 in his pocket. $6,000 owed. "There is an offer on the table," she continued. "A development company called Westward Horizons has been trying to acquire parcels in that area for some time. They have extended their offer to you. $10,000 for the full parcel. As is. They will cover the back taxes and all associated legal fees out of the purchase price." He was quiet for a moment. "What is on the land?" he asked. She paused. "One structure, a Quonset hut. The county records describe it as a single outbuilding. Utilities off-grid, well water, generator power. No additional improvements on record." He stood with the receiver against his ear and thought about that. A piece of land with nothing on it but a metal shed, and a dead man who had lived on it until he died. A dead man who had, for reasons Wren had never been given and had eventually stopped asking about, handed a 5-year-old child to the state of California and disappeared. Why did he turn down their offer? Wren asked. When Westward Horizons came to him. Why did he say no? A longer pause this time. I was not his attorney then. I came into this at the end. I'm going to look at it first, he said. Mr. Mercer, the offer has a deadline. The back taxes have a deadline. If you travel out there and spend time you do not have, and then decide to sell, the window may have closed. Westward is motivated, but they are not patient. I will be on the bus to Covenant today, he said. I will call you when I get there. She exhaled. Controlled. Professional. Very well. There is a key waiting for you at the bus depot in Covenant. A lockbox at the ticket counter. The combination is your date of birth. Your grandfather arranged it. His date of birth. The birthday of the child he gave away. Set as the combination to a lockbox in a town 1,000 miles from anywhere Wren had ever been. Whether that was cruelty or something else entirely, he could not yet say. He did not have enough information. He hung up the phone. He bought a bag of peanuts from a vending machine and ate them on a bench and waited for his bus. The journey took 2 days. He watched California dismantle itself outside the window. The sprawl of the inland valleys, the commercial corridors with their identical signage, the sun-bleached subdivisions that spread out to the edges of everything and then stopped, replaced by something older, harder, less interested in human convenience. Then the land changed. Nevada came up dry and mineral pale. The sky bigger than it had any right to be. The distances between things suddenly meaningful in a way they never were in the city. You could see for miles out here, and in every direction. Nothing. Which was not the same as empty. It was full of itself, full of its own silence, its own patience, its own complete disinterest in whether you were looking at it or not. Utah followed. Red geometry, rock formations that looked like the bones of something enormous, pushing through the skin of the earth after centuries of pressure. A landscape that does not explain itself, does not need to, simply exists, and dares you to have an opinion about it. Ren slept with his head against the glass. He ate vending machine food at the rest stops. He did not speak to anyone. He had learned over 13 years of moving between homes that conversations on buses led to questions. Where are you from? Where are you going? And he never had satisfying answers to either. He thought, in the spaces between fitful sleep, about the 6 months he had spent with Jonas Harlan when he was 5 years old. The memories were fragments, more texture than narrative. Cold air and the smell of pine resin, the sound of something mechanical, rhythmic, a tool working against resistance, a wool blanket rough against his chin, a voice, low, infrequent, that did not talk down to him. He remembered thinking, at 5, that the old man spoke to him like he was already someone, not a project, not a problem, not a small thing to be managed or redirected or explained to, just a person whose presence in the room was a fact, and facts were something Jonas Harlan worked with, rather than around. Then, one morning, a social worker at the door, soft voices in another room, a bag being packed, a car ride, a new house with a new family who called him Buddy and smelled like laundry detergent and good intentions. He had understood, over the years, that the word surrendered meant the old man had chosen to let him go, that the paperwork said voluntary, that there had been no legal compulsion, no court order, no external force, only a decision made by a grown man about a small child who had no say in it. He had built his understanding of himself in part on that foundation. He was the boy who had been let go, on purpose. It gave him a particular kind of hardness, not aggressive, just dense, load-bearing, interior architecture that holds everything else up by refusing to flex. He did not know yet, sitting on that bus, watching Wyoming begin to appear outside the window like a slow confession, that the foundation was wrong. Wyoming arrived the way Wyoming always does, without announcement, the landscape simply becoming itself. The hills rolled out brown and sage-dusted, under a sky the color of old pewter. The wind moved through the grass in long, slow pulses. There was a beauty to it that was entirely indifferent to being observed, a beauty that had been there long enough to stop performing for anyone who passed through. Covenant was smaller than he had expected, a main street of 2-story brick buildings, most of them original, unrestored, their facades bearing the dignity of things that have stood long enough to stop caring about appearances. A hardware store with tools arranged in the window like an exhibit, a bar called the Rimrock with a neon sign that buzzed faintly in the dusk, and at the corner of Main and 2nd, a diner. The sign above the door was hand-lettered, faded but legible. Marshes. The kind of sign a person paints once and never replaces because it says what it needs to say and does not require improvement. Ren went in. Because he was hungry. Because the bus depot was attached to the gas station at the south end of the street, and he needed to eat before he picked up the key and figured out how to get 20 miles into nowhere. The diner was warm. Wood-paneled walls, a counter with 6 stools, 4 tables by the window, the smell of coffee that had been made properly and often. The radio was on somewhere low. Country music, old stuff, the kind that still had stories in it. The woman behind the counter was in her early 60s, slim, silver-streaked hair pulled back, hands that had seen work, real work, the kind that leaves marks. She was wiping the counter when Ren walked in, and she looked up at him and stopped. Not stopped like startled, stopped like recognizing, like something in the shape of his face had triggered a memory she had been carrying without knowing she was waiting to use it. Wren sat at the counter. "Just coffee," he said. She poured it without looking away from him. Set it down, dark, properly made. He wrapped his hands around it, because his hands were cold, and because holding something warm was a kindness he had not been offered by another person in a while. "You are Jonas Harlan's grandson," she said. Not a question. Wren looked up. "How did you know?" She studied his face for a moment. The line of his jaw, something in the eyes. "You look like your mother," she said. "Same jawline, same way of looking at everything without saying anything. Catherine used to do that too, sit in a room and just watch, like she was reading the whole world from the inside out." Wren set down the coffee. "You knew my mother. She came here once," Lena said. "Before you were born. She sat right where you are sitting. She was maybe 7 months along with you. Drove all the way from California to see her father. And he was not here yet. He had not moved out here yet. So she sat at this counter and drank coffee and told me her father was the most stubborn man who ever lived, and that she loved him more than she could stand sometimes." Wren did not move. The diner was quiet around him. The radio played something soft. A truck passed outside. The world continued its ordinary business while something inside him went very still. Lena reached beneath the counter. She brought up a small wooden box. Old. The lid rubbed smooth from years of handling. "Jonas left this with me," she said. 7 years ago. He said to hold it, and to give it to the boy when he came. He did not say if. He said when." Wren looked at the box. "He came into this diner once a month," Lena said. "Every month for 12 years. Same corner booth. Black coffee. Never talked to anyone. But every single time. He asked me the same question. 'Have you heard anything about the boy?' I never had anything to tell him, but he never stopped asking." She pushed the box across the counter. Wren opened it. Inside, a pocket watch. Old, well made. The casing worn to a dull gold from years of being held. On the back, 2 letters engraved. C.M. Catherine Mercer. He picked it up, felt the weight of it in his palm. This had been in his mother's hand. This had traveled in her pocket or her purse or wherever she kept it. The metal had been warm against her body. It carried her initials. And now it was in his hand. Passed from a woman he could not remember, to a man he did not know, to a stranger in a diner who had held it for 7 years because she was asked to. He closed his fingers around it. Lena watched him, her face carrying the expression of a woman who had raised children and buried a husband and understood that some moments required nothing from her except to be present in them. "You need a ride out to the property," she said. "Yes, Frank Dunbar," she said. "He is usually at the Rimrock by this hour. He found the lockbox first, at the bus depot, turned the dial, 0814, August 14th. Inside, a key. It was not what he expected. He had anticipated something functional, modern, a padlock key or a door key of ordinary manufacture. This was neither. It was iron, heavy for its size. The head worked into an intricate pattern, almost decorative, a key that belonged to old buildings, to locks made in a time when the mechanism itself was considered worth making well. You would not throw a key like this away. You would keep it. Wonder about it. Feel its weight in your palm as a question. He put it in his pocket next to the watch. 2 objects, both from people who were gone, both waiting for him in a town he had never heard of until a week ago. Frank Dunbar was at the far end of the bar at the Rimrock, a broad man in a canvas jacket, hands that had done physical work for decades, blunt-fingered, scarred at the knuckles in the pattern that comes from working with metal and machinery. He looked Wren over with the frank assessment of someone who reads people the way you read weather, quickly, from surface signs, without sentiment. "You are the Harlan kid," Dunbar said. Wren told him he needed a ride out to the property. Dunbar drank from his beer, set it down carefully. 20 miles of bad road, $50. Wren paid it. The truck was a heavy-duty Ford, 15 years old, maintained with the attention working men in remote places give to the tools they depend on. The cab smelled of diesel and sawdust. Dunbar drove without conversation for the first 10 miles, which Wren appreciated. Strange one. Your grandfather, Dunbar said eventually, kept to himself like a religion. I used to drop supplies at the gate for him a couple times a year. He never came out while I was there. Just left a list on the post the night before, and payment in an envelope. Never short by $1. Not once in all those years. Wren said nothing. You planning on staying out there? Dunbar asked. Do not know yet. Dunbar made a sound that was neither approval nor disapproval, just acknowledgement. A man who understood that some decisions could not be made at a distance. The road had gone from asphalt to packed gravel to two-track dirt. The truck's headlights cutting through the dark in a long yellow cone that showed nothing on either side but sage and sky. Miles of it, the absence of anything human in every direction. Then the truck slowed. There she is, Dunbar said, and pointed, in the headlights, on a slight rise of land, the Quonset hut, a perfect half-cylinder of corrugated steel, approximately 40 feet long, sitting on a concrete pad, no windows on the visible face, no lights, no landscaping, no infrastructure visible from the road. It looked exactly like what it was listed as in the county records, an outbuilding, a structure of zero distinction, the kind of thing you drive past without registering. This is as far as I go, Dunbar said. Wren got out with his bag. The cold hit him immediately. Not just temperature, altitude, openness, the cold of a place where the wind has nothing to interrupt it for 50 miles. The air was so clear it felt sharp in his lungs. Above him, the sky was packed with stars in a density he had never seen from California. The Milky Way, not an abstraction, not a photograph, a structural presence, a physical fact, stretched across the dark like something that had always been there, and was mildly curious about why it had taken him so long to notice. Dunbar took the money but held a moment, looking at Wren across the cab. Key fits the padlock on the door, he said. There is wood inside for the stove. Jonas always kept it stocked. You get into trouble, you walk east. You will hit the highway in about 4 miles. Wren nodded. Dunbar shifted into reverse, backed down the track, his taillights diminishing until they were 2 small red points, and then nothing at all. Wren stood in the absolute dark, wind, grass, the vast tidal sound of a landscape breathing. He stood there long enough to understand that the silence was not empty. It was full of things that had been there before him and would be there after him. Things that did not require his presence to continue. Not the silence of a room where no one was speaking. The silence of a place that had never needed speech. He picked up his bag, walked up the rise. The padlock on the door was heavy-duty, far more substantial than the door it secured. The iron key slid into it without resistance and turned with a precision that surprised him. Clean, certain, as if it had been maintained recently, as if someone had oiled this lock knowing that someday a hand would come to turn it. The door groaned on its hinges. He stepped inside. Cold air, dust, old wood smoke, something underneath, faint, machine oil, concrete. He found the flashlight in his bag and swept the beam around, a single long space, the curved walls forming the ceiling and sides without distinction. To his left, a cast-iron wood stove with a neat stack of split firewood beside it. To his right, a cot with a folded wool blanket. In the center, a heavy wooden table and a single straight-back chair. Along the far wall, floor-to-ceiling metal shelving loaded with military-style ammunition cans, each labeled in small, precise handwriting. Rice, beans, water purification, first aid, generator fuel, spare parts. In the corner, a steel welding table covered in tools and metal scraps. Against the back wall, a door that appeared to lead to a small bathroom. That was all. He stood in the middle of it and let the reality settle. This was his inheritance, a metal shed in Wyoming with $40 worth of canned goods and a cot. The state of California had given him $200 and a bus ticket. His grandfather had given him this, and somewhere in an office in Cheyenne, $10,000 was sitting on a table, waiting for his signature. He crossed to the cot, sat down. The wool blanket was rough under his hand, exactly as he remembered it from 13 years ago, which was impossible, because it could not be the same blanket. But the texture was identical, the same deliberate coarseness, not a failure of quality, but a choice. And for a moment, the distance between 5 years old and 18 collapsed. He was just a small person in a cold, unfamiliar place, being asked to make sense of something larger than him. He had felt this before, in the first hours of every new placement, the vertigo of a world that had rearranged itself without asking permission. He stood, swept the flashlight beam around again, slower this time, looking at things rather than past them. He had learned to do this in every new house, every new room. You did not understand a space by glancing at it. You looked at it in sections, methodically, until you knew where everything was and what it meant. The footlocker was under the cot. He had seen it on the first pass and dismissed it as standard storage. Now he pulled it out. Military surplus, dark green, heavy, on the front panel, stenciled in the same small, precise lettering as the shelving labels. Wren. He lifted the lid. On top, a sealed envelope. His name on the front in that forward-leaning handwriting. Beneath it, a set of blueprints rolled and tied with twine. Beneath those, tools, a heavy-duty wrench set, a crowbar, a socket set in a molded case. He set aside the blueprints and tools, picked up the envelope. His hands were steady. This surprised him, because the steadiness was not the steadiness of calm. It was the steadiness of someone holding something that they understood, on some level below language, was going to change everything, not from having nothing to fear, but from deciding that fear is not useful right now. He opened it. The letter inside was 4 pages, handwritten on cream-colored paper, the same small, precise script he had been looking at all day. He sat on the cot with the flashlight balanced on the footlocker and began to read. Wren, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you are a man. I am not good with words. I am better with engines and concrete and things that hold their shape under pressure. But I will try. I expect you have questions. I expect you may hate me. You have every right. They told you I abandoned you. I made sure they would tell you that. It was the safest story for you to carry. Your mother, Catherine, was a good person. She was also a brave one, which in the wrong circumstances amounts to the same thing as being in danger. The man who fathered you, Daniel Mercer, worked as an internal accountant for a company called Westward Horizons and its parent entities. He kept records, detailed records, specific records of things that his employers needed to remain unrecorded. Daniel died in 2010. An accident, officially. I know what it was. Your mother took his records. She came to me first, because I was the only person she trusted who was old enough and stubborn enough and had little enough left to lose. We were trying to find the right path when she died. October 2011. Another accident. You were 5 years old. I took you in because there was no one else, and because you were hers. I kept you for 6 months while I figured out what to do. But they found us. Not the police, the people who employ the police. A man named Lowell Crane. He runs Westward Horizons. He is the reason your parents are dead, and the reason I had to make the hardest decision of my life. I made a deal. I gave Crane everything I had, my savings, my property in California, everything liquid I could convert, in exchange. He agreed to leave you alone, but the condition was that I disappear, and you had to disappear in a way that could not be traced back to me. The state system was the only answer. It is the last place men like Crane look for the grandchildren of men like me. You became a ward of the state of California, and I became a ghost. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I am asking you to understand that I chose your life over my right to be in it. Every year I was away from you was a year I chose on purpose. Not because I stopped loving you, because I never stopped. There is more. The blueprints will begin to explain it. But first, go to the welding table. Find the hexagonal bolt on the rear left leg. Use the 3/4-inch socket. Turn it counterclockwise. Come see what I built for you. Ren sat with the letter in his hands for a long time. The wind moved against the metal walls. A low, resonant pressure. Not quite sound, but present. The flashlight beam held steady on the page. He read the letter again, then a third time. The architecture of his life, the story he had built himself out of, the fundamental fact of having been let go on purpose, of having been a voluntary surrender, sat in the center of his chest, like a stone he had been carrying so long, he had stopped noticing its weight. It had become structural. He had built everything else around it, and now someone was telling him the stone was not what he thought it was. He did not know how to feel about that yet. The information was too large to process all at once. It required the kind of time that a cold Tuesday night in a Wyoming metal shed did not provide, so he set the feeling aside and did what he had always done. He focused on the next immediate thing. He found the 3/4-inch socket in the molded case, went to the welding table. He had noticed on the second pass that the debris on the table was distributed too evenly, too arranged, like set dressing rather than genuine accumulation. Now he knew why. He found the bolt, rear left leg, painted the same gray as the leg itself. You would not notice it if you were not looking for it. He fitted the socket over it. Applied pressure. It resisted at first. Genuinely. The resistance of something that had been set and left, and was not expecting to be moved. He leaned his weight into it, turned counterclockwise, 1 revolution, 2. Then a pause, and from beneath the floor, a low hydraulic hiss that was startling in the stillness. The concrete slab directly beneath the table, a section he had not perceived as distinct from the surrounding floor, began to descend, not hinge, not swing, lower, evenly, the table going with it, the whole assembly dropping at the measured pace of something engineered to be controlled and quiet. A rectangular opening appeared in the floor, 3 feet by 6, the edges machined clean. A staircase descended into the dark. The air that rose from the opening was different from the air in the hut. Dry, temperature controlled, carrying a faint, clean, slightly electric quality. The air of a place that had systems, that had been designed by someone who understood the difference between a space that keeps a person alive and a space that is built for a person to live in. Ren stood at the edge. He could take the $10,000. He could call Nora Caldwell in the morning and say the decision was easy. He could be in California by the end of the week with $10,000 and no particular plan, but at least some distance, some starting point, something. He picked up the flashlight. He went down. The stairs were steel, narrow, steep, ringing under his boots. At the bottom, a short corridor of smooth poured concrete, a single heavy door at the far end. Submarine style, a central wheel handle surrounded by locking lugs, built to hold against pressure. The mechanism engaged with a series of deliberate clunks when he turned the wheel, then released, and the door swung inward. What he walked into was not what the letter had prepared him for, and the letter had tried. The space was the same footprint as the Quonset hut above, the same curving wall profile, but it had been lined and finished into something entirely different. Pale wood paneling on the curved walls, warm under indirect lighting that ran along the ceiling in a continuous strip. gray carpet underfoot, dense, sound-absorbing. The air was warm and dry and carried the faint green scent of something living. On one side, a compact kitchen, electric range, refrigerator humming at low volume, sink with a real faucet, cabinets built from the same pale wood as the walls. On the other side, a sitting area, a couch, a bookshelf running the full length of the wall, loaded with paperbacks and technical manuals and binders in different colors, a desk with a lamp and a chair. At the far end, a bed, properly made, thick comforter, 2 pillows, an additional wool blanket folded at the foot. It was a home, not an approximation of one, not a space adapted to serve as one out of necessity. A home designed and built from the beginning to be lived in, every dimension considered, every material chosen for how it would feel to a person spending their days inside it. The shelving at a height that did not require reaching, the lighting angled to avoid glare, the carpet laid in sections that could be replaced individually. Wren walked through it slowly, ran his hand along the kitchen counter, smooth laminate, no chips. He opened the refrigerator, empty, but cold, running on its own power, patient. He pressed his palm against the carpet and felt it give properly. He turned a full circle in the center of the room. 13 years. The man had spent 13 years making this. Not for himself. The hut above was where Jonas had lived. That cot, that wood stove, that single blanket. This room with its warm light and its full bookshelf, and its kitchen and its bed with 2 pillows. This was for someone else. This was for him. He got to the desk last. On it, a lamp he had not yet turned on, a small framed photograph lying face down, and a second envelope propped against the lamp. His name on the front. He turned the photograph over first, black and white, slightly grainy, developed without commercial equipment. A young woman, maybe mid-20s, dark-haired, with a wide smile that had nothing performed about it, nothing practiced, nothing held back. She was holding a baby wrapped in a white blanket, and the way her whole body angled toward it, protective, certain, said something about the relationship between her and the child that did not need a caption. On the back, in Jonas's handwriting, Catherine Harlan Mercer, B, May 10th, 1982, D, October 4th, 2011, and below that, you at 4 months. Wren set the photograph down on the desk, with great care, as if it could be damaged by the wrong kind of handling. He had never seen a picture of his mother holding him. He had never seen a picture of his mother at all, except a school photo in a file. Years old, a teenager with a guarded expression, someone putting up with being photographed rather than enjoying it. This was different. This was her being happy. This was her being someone's mother. Someone's whole world held in 2 hands, like something she intended to keep. He pulled the pocket watch from his jacket, set it next to the photograph. C.M. Catherine Mercer. The watch, the photograph. 2 objects that had traveled separate paths through time and distance to arrive at this desk, in this underground room, in this place in Wyoming where a man had spent 13 years building something his grandson might never come to find. But he had come, and he had found it. He opened the second letter, short, direct, the handwriting the same. Wren, if you have made it here, you passed the first test. You chose to know. That is not as common as people think. This is your home now. The power is geothermal, the water from a deep aquifer, triple filtered, the air circulated and scrubbed. The systems are documented in the blue binders on the shelf, built to be maintained by one person with basic mechanical aptitude and the willingness to learn. There is more to find, but it has waited 13 years. It will wait 1 more night. Sleep first. Below the signature, a single additional line. The combination to what comes next is your mother's birthday and your own. 8 digits. May 10th, 1982, August 14th, 2006. I expect you will know what to do with that. Ren set the letter down. He looked at the photograph for a long time. The woman in it was someone he had not known and had always been trying to find, without knowing the name of what he was looking for. She had his coloring, or he had hers, the same line of the jaw, the same stillness in the eyes even while the rest of the face was open and warm. He thought about a man building a room for a boy he could not be near, choosing the carpet, getting the lighting right, making sure the shelves were stocked with enough books that a person would not run out of something to read during a long winter underground, running geothermal lines because he did not want the boy to come home to a cold place. Home. The word arrived without permission, and he did not send it away. The stone in the center of his chest was still there. It had not gotten lighter, but it had changed what it meant. He was not the boy who had been let go on purpose. He was the boy who had been hidden on purpose, by someone who had nothing left to give except the act of hiding him, who had paid for that act with 13 years in a hole in the ground, alone, and had considered it a reasonable price. He stood, went to this kitchen, ran water from the tap into his cupped hands and drank. Cold, clean, the purest water he had ever tasted. No mineral flatness, no chemical edge, just water. The way water is supposed to be before people do things to it. He turned off the light above the sink, stood in the soft glow of the ceiling strips, looked around at the room Jonas Harlan had built for him with his own hands over 13 years. Tomorrow he would find what else was waiting. Tonight. He lay down on the bed, for the first time in his adult life, in a room that was his. The wool blanket at the foot had the same texture he remembered from being 5 years old, the same deliberate roughness, and he did not try to determine whether it was the same blanket or simply the same considered choice made twice by the same person. It did not matter. What mattered was this. Someone had touched this wool, folded it, placed it at the foot of this bed, knowing that someday, maybe, a boy who had spent 13 years sleeping in other people's houses would lie down here and feel something he recognized, and understand that recognition was not accident. It was love, expressed the only way the man who felt it knew how, through material, through construction, through the precise and patient work of building something that would outlast him. Ren lay on his back, looked at the curving ceiling, listened to the air circulators. A low and steady hum, the sound of a system doing exactly what it was built to do. For the first time in 13 years, he could not identify a single thing in his immediate environment that was trying to be something other than what it was. The lights dimmed on a timer. Outside, Wyoming continued in its enormous indifference. The wind moved across 40 acres of land that held more beneath it than anyone standing on its surface would ever guess. The stars turned. The temperature dropped further. The clean, dry cold of a high-altitude winter night. Ren Mercer, who had never had a home, slept in one. He woke before the lights came up. The ceiling timer had the room at low amber when he opened his eyes, a warmth that suggested dawn without fully committing to it. He lay still for a moment, doing what he had learned to do in every new place, cataloging the sounds, the quality of the air, the specific character of the silence, before deciding what kind of morning it was going to be. Air circulators, the faint hum of the refrigerator, somewhere in the structure, the barely perceptible vibration of something mechanical running as it was designed to run. That was all. No voices through walls that belonged to other people. No institutional clocks measuring out the day in equal portions. No footsteps in a hallway outside a door that did not lock from the inside. He sat up. The photograph of his mother was on the desk where he had left it. He did not look at it directly, but was aware of it. The way you are aware of a source of heat in a cold room, something that registers at the edge of attention without requiring your full focus. He made coffee, found a sealed canister in a cabinet, a small electric percolator that had been cleaned and left ready, like someone had washed it and set it on the counter and thought, "He will want coffee in the morning, and I will not be here to make it for him, so I will make sure the machine is ready." The coffee was dark, slightly bitter. He sat at the kitchen counter and opened the blue binder labeled Systems Overview, and he read. He spent an hour with the binder before he allowed himself to think about what else was down here. The documentation was thorough, in a way that revealed a particular cast of mind. Jonas had written everything down: the geothermal system, the heat exchanger maintenance schedule, seasonal adjustment protocols, the water filtration array with a separate section on testing frequency and acceptable mineral profiles, the air circulation and scrubbing system, HEPA filtration, a carbon exchange unit that needed its media replaced every 18 months, electrical systems, backup battery banks, load calculations for adding or removing draws from the grid. Every page was written in the same economical hand, detailed without being dense, precise without being cold. It was the writing of a man who had thought carefully about what a single person working alone would need to know, and had tried to give them exactly that, and nothing more. Not the writing of someone who wanted to impress, the writing of someone who wanted to be useful. He put the binder back, rinsed his cup. He went to find what else Jonas Harlan had left behind. The door to the next module was at the far end of the habitation space, a standard interior door, deliberately unremarkable. Behind it, a short connecting corridor, then another submarine-style door, identical to the one at the base of the stairs. When he opened it, warm, humid air moved over him, and he stopped. The smell hit first. Green things, earth, the richness of soil that has organisms in it doing their invisible labor. He had not encountered a smell like it since a school trip to a botanical garden when he was 9, and even then it had been through glass, observed rather than entered. He stepped inside. The hydroponics module was the same Quonset footprint as the others, but felt entirely different. The curved walls were lined with wire shelving, tier on tier, and on every tier, trays of growth medium supporting plants at various stages of development. Lettuce, a dozen varieties, some heading, some still loose and reaching upward. Tomato plants staked and trained along wire guides. Small green fruits clustering at the nodes. Peppers, 3 or 4 kinds, their fruit beginning to color from green to red and orange. Herbs along the lower shelves, dense and fragrant. Swiss chard with stems the color of traffic signals. Beans climbing a lattice that ran the full length of one wall. Above everything, full-spectrum grow lights in long horizontal banks, their warm white glow giving the room the quality of a perpetual afternoon. The system ran from a central control panel mounted near the door. Pumps, timers, nutrient dosing, humidity management, all of it automated, all of it running. The last manual adjustment logged 11 weeks ago. The system had been running itself since then, without intervention, and the plants were thriving. Ren walked slowly through the rows. He touched a tomato leaf, felt the life in it, the tension of a plant that is doing well, getting what it needs, growing because the conditions are right and no one has given it a reason to stop. 13 years. Jonas built this, lived inside it, tended it, ate from it, maintained the systems, and never told a single person that any of it existed. At the far end, another door, beside it on the floor, wire crates of preserved goods and glass jars, hundreds of them, pickled vegetables, pressure-canned fruits, dried beans and grains, the stores of a man who had thought carefully about time, about the distance between what you have now and what you will need. Ren stood among the green growing things and breathed. The air was warm and alive in a way that the air in the habitation module was not. This was the room where things continued, where the work of staying alive was made visible in rows of leaves and vines and roots, finding their way through whatever medium they had been given. He understood something then, about Jonas, about the kind of man who builds a garden underground. You do not build a garden if you have given up. You do not plant tomatoes if you do not believe someone will be there to eat them. A garden is an act of faith. a commitment to a future you may not see but have decided to make ready for. Jonas had not given up. Not once in 13 years. He went back up to the Quonset hut. The vault entrance was where the blueprint had indicated. The shelving unit along the east wall, loaded with ammunition cans labeled spare parts. He found the empty can on the third shelf and opened it. The lever inside was a simple bar handle, worn smooth at the grip. He pulled it. A soft click. The entire shelving unit shifted forward by half an inch. He pushed. It swung outward on hidden casters, with the easy precision of something built by a man who understood tolerances, who knew that a mechanism you had to fight was a mechanism that would eventually fail. Behind it, the curved wall of the hut had been replaced by a flat steel plate. In the center, a combination lock, steel, heavy, institutional quality, 8 digits, his mother's birthday, and his own, 051 01982 0814 2006. He spun the dial through the sequence, each correct position engaged with a small internal confirmation, a click that said yes, you belong here. This was meant for you. On the final number, a deliberate and irrevocable thud from somewhere inside the mechanism, and the handle disengaged. He pulled the door open. The air inside was cold, dry, maintained at a temperature designed to preserve paper and electronics. The space was the same footprint as the others, but felt smaller because of how it was furnished. One wall, lined with filing cabinets, floor to ceiling, each drawer labeled in Jonas's hand. Soil samples, with dates and GPS coordinates, water table readings, quarterly, spanning 11 years, corporate filings for Westward Horizons, and 12 subsidiary names listed on a separate index card tacked to the face of one drawer. Shell company records, financial analysis, aerial and ground-level photographs of sites he could not yet identify. Against the opposite wall, steel shelving loaded with hard-sided cases, black, identical, stacked 4 high and 2 deep. He opened the nearest one. Cash, vacuum-sealed bricks of $100 bills, arranged with the same methodical care as everything else Jonas Harlan had built or stored or documented. He opened a second case, a third, all the same. He did not count it. He could not have counted it with any accuracy. He closed the cases, stepped back. On the heavy steel work table in the center of the room, a laptop computer, closed, plugged into a power strip, a leather-bound ledger beside it, thick, spine-worn, and next to the ledger, a small digital voice recorder with a strip of masking tape on its face. The tape read in the familiar handwriting, "Play me." He picked up the recorder, pressed play. The voice that came from the small speaker was low, deliberate, unhurried, slightly roughened by age, and by the quality of a voice that had spoken mostly to itself for many years. It carried the cadence of a man who had decided what he wanted to say, and was going to say it in the order he had chosen, without detour, without performance. "Ren," the voice said, "if you are hearing this, you found the vault, which means you read the letters, which means you know most of what I need you to know. But there are things I could not put on paper, and those are what I am going to tell you now. Your father's name was Daniel Mercer. He was not a bad man, not fundamentally. He was a man who made a practical choice, and discovered too late that what he had chosen to look away from was larger than he had understood. He kept records because he was an accountant, and keeping records was what he knew. I believe in the end, he kept them also because some part of him understood that what he was involved in needed to be witnessed somewhere, even if only in columns of numbers on paper that no one else would ever read. Lowell Crane owns Westward Horizons. What Westward Horizons does officially is acquire and develop remote land parcels for resort and residential projects. What it actually does, and has done for over 2 decades, is operate as a disposal service for industrial waste that cannot be handled through legal channels, chemical manufacturing byproducts, petroleum refining residue, agricultural runoff concentrates from operations that would face federal penalties for standard disposal. Crane's network purchases remote land through a rotating series of shell corporations, uses each parcel as a burial site, and moves on. The shells are dissolved after each transaction. The chain of ownership is designed to be impenetrable. Your father documented all of it, not as an act of courage, at least not initially, as professional habit. Then something shifted in him. He started making copies. He made them in a way that suggested he intended someone eventually to read them. A pause in the recording. Ren could hear his grandfather breathing. Slow, controlled. They killed him before he could do anything with the copies. Your mother found them in his belongings and understood immediately what they were. She brought them to me because I was the only person in her life old enough and stubborn enough to not be frightened into silence. We were 3 weeks from getting the documentation to a federal prosecutor your mother had identified as clean, a man with no relationship to Crane's network. Then she died. I went to ground. I brought everything here. I spent the next 13 years building what you see, and building the case that the ledger and those filing cabinets represent. Another pause. Longer. The evidence is complete. Soil samples from 11 burial sites, including 3 on this property, showing contamination profiles that match the industrial sources documented in your father's records. Water table data showing migration of those contaminants toward municipal supply aquifers. Corporate records tracing the shell company network to Crane's personal holding entities. Financial records showing the fee structures Crane charged his industrial clients for the service of making their waste disappear. It is everything a prosecutor needs. It has been everything a prosecutor needs for at least 4 years. I could not take it forward myself, because I am officially a dead man, and because Crane has resources I do not. To bring this case forward, you need someone who can operate in the legal world, who has standing, who has personal motivation sufficient to match the risk. There is a woman named Nora Caldwell. Ren went still. She is my attorney of record for the estate, which is how you know her name. But that is not all she is. Her father, Eldon Caldwell, was an assistant attorney general for the state of Wyoming in 2007. He began investigating a series of land acquisitions in Fremont and Natrona counties that matched the signature of Crane's operation. In 2008, Crane had him removed, fabricated a financial misconduct case, used his connections in the state judiciary to ensure it went nowhere defensible. Eldon Caldwell resigned, was never formally cleared, and died in 2015 with his reputation destroyed and his work unfinished. Nora Caldwell went to law school 2 years after her father's resignation. I know why she went. She does not know that I know. She does not know about this place, or this evidence, or the connection between her father's investigation and what is documented in those cabinets. When you tell her, she will understand immediately what she is looking at. She is not a tool for you to use. She is a person with her own obligation to this, as real as yours. Approach her as an equal. The voice paused again, and when it returned, something in it had shifted. A heaviness, the sound of a man arriving at the thing he had been building toward. In the cases against the wall, there is enough money to give you a life. Ren, a real one, built on your own terms, without any of this weight. I built that option deliberately, because I had no right to draft you into a war that is not technically yours. But your parents are dead because of Lowell Crane, and 40,000 people in this county and the ones adjacent to it are drinking water that is being quietly poisoned by what he buried under this land, and land like it. Those are facts that exist whether or not you choose to act on them. I have given you the battlefield. I have given you everything I know. What you do with it is yours alone. One more thing. Do not try to crack the encrypted partition on the laptop by yourself. The password is in the blue binder. The system's overview. Page 47. The footnote. It looks like a maintenance specification. It is the key to everything on that drive that I could not put in the physical files. Take care of the plants. They have been running themselves for a while, and the basil needs thinning. The recorder ran for a few more seconds of silence, then clicked off. Ren set it down on the table. He stood in the cold, dry air of the vault for a long time, looking at the filing cabinets, the cases of money, the closed laptop, the leather-bound ledger that his father had kept because he was an accountant, and keeping records was what he knew. He thought about his mother at 29 years old, standing in a dead man's apartment, holding a ledger in her hands, deciding what to do with it. She could have burned it, could have put it in a box and closed the box, and lived the rest of her life without opening it again. Nobody would have known. Nobody would have blamed her. But she had not done that. She had picked up the ledger and walked out the door with it, toward the only person she trusted enough to hand it to. He thought about Jonas Harlan, spending 13 years in a hole in the ground, building a case he could not close himself, waiting for an heir who might or might not show up, and might or might not choose to do anything with what he found. He went upstairs, found page 47 of the system's overview binder. The footnote was at the bottom of a page describing water filtration maintenance. It read, "Filter media replacement frequency contingent on source, T, D, S readings. Baseline parameter 2714-AW-0510-0814, established from initial aquifer testing. Adjust per quarterly log." It looked exactly like a technical specification, nothing more. He took the binder down to the vault, opened the laptop, entered the string. The encrypted partition opened. He called Nora Caldwell at noon. Her voice was the same as it had been at the bus station payphone. Efficient, carrying the mild patience of someone who expected this call to concern a straightforward decision. Sell the property, sign the papers, move on. He told her he was not selling. She began the response she had clearly prepared, the one about deadlines, back taxes, county seizure timelines, the practical impossibility of an 18-year-old with no resources holding onto a property that cost more to keep than it was worth. He let her finish. Then he said what he had spent the morning deciding to say. "I have been inside the property, Miss Caldwell. All of it. I know what my grandfather built here, and I know what he built it for. I know about Westward Horizons. I know about Lowell Crane. And I know about your father." The silence that followed was different from her professional pauses. It was not the silence of someone choosing words. It was the silence of someone who had stopped breathing. "What did you say?" "I have the evidence. All of it. 13 years of documentation, physical samples, financial records, corporate filings tracing Crane's network to 11 disposal sites across 6 states, a ledger kept by my father, and digital files on an encrypted drive that cross-reference everything. Your father's investigation in 2007 was correct. Everything he suspected was real. I have the records that prove it." She made a sound he could not categorize. Not quite a breath. Not quite a word. Something involuntary. The sound of a locked door opening inside a person. "I am not calling to ask for help," he said. "I am calling because my grandfather's notes say you have been waiting for this. I think we both have something the other needs. I think we should talk in person." "I will be there tomorrow morning," she said, and the professional cadence was entirely gone from her voice. Something older was underneath it. The voice of a person who had been holding something at a careful distance for a very long time, and had just felt it move closer. She arrived at 9 the next morning. Dark blue Subaru. Wyoming winter on every surface. She was younger than her phone voice suggested, somewhere in her late 30s. Dark hair pulled back, eyes that evaluated the Quonset hut with the quick attention of someone assessing a situation before committing to it. "Show me what you found," she said. He showed her everything. He watched her face as she descended the stairs for the first time, as she stood in the warm light of the habitation module and processed what she was looking at. The professional composure she wore as naturally as clothing slipped briefly, and what replaced it was something unguarded. A woman standing in a room that had been built by a man she had met only twice. realizing that the man she had dismissed as a recluse had been something else entirely. In the hydroponics module, she stopped at a row of tomato plants, stood there without speaking for nearly a minute. Wren let her stand. Some things you do not interrupt. In the vault. She opened the filing cabinets one by one, reading labels, pulling drawers, handling documents with the attention of someone who understood their legal weight precisely. She spent 40 minutes with the ledger, sitting at the work table, coat still on, turning pages slowly, making notes on a legal pad she had brought from her car. When she finally looked up, her face had settled into something that was not calm, but had the quality of a decision being made and held. "My father spent 2 years on this," she said, "before they took it from him." She set the ledger down carefully. "He had 3 of Crane's shell companies documented. Your grandfather has 12. The disposal site data alone." She continued, moving to the filing cabinets, running her hand along the drawer fronts. If the financial records establish Crane's direct personal benefit rather than just corporate liability, this goes far beyond regulatory fines. She stopped, looked at him. "We need to move on this immediately." And there it was, the fracture he had not been expecting, not from outside, from inside the room, from between the 2 people who were supposed to be on the same side. "No," Wren said. Nora turned fully toward him. "What do you mean, no?" "I mean I have not finished reading the encrypted partition. I have been through maybe 40% of the digital files. There is a cross-referencing system my grandfather built that connects the physical evidence to the financial records. I do not fully understand it yet, and I am not sending a package I do not fully understand." Nora set down her pen. "We do not have the luxury of waiting for you to finish a reading project. The back taxes alone put this property at risk. Every day we sit on this is a day Crane's people could find out what is here." Wren did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "My grandfather spent 13 years building this. He did not send it out because it was not ready. He died with it still in the ground because he understood that incomplete evidence does not convict anyone. It gives the defense a way to discredit everything. I'm not going to spend 13 years on it, but I'm not going to spend 13 minutes either." Her face tightened. "You are 18 years old. I have been waiting for this since I was 26. My father died with his name still damaged, his investigation dismissed, his career described in public record as a failed tenure cut short by misconduct. Misconduct that was fabricated by the man whose filing cabinets we are standing in front of right now." She stepped closer. "I have 12 years of waiting in me. Do you understand what that means? 12 years of knowing my father was right and having no way to prove it." "I understand it," Wren said, "because my grandfather had 13, and he did not send it. Not because he did not want to, because it was not ready. And if he thought it was not ready after 13 years of work, then I owe him the respect of checking his judgment before I overrule it." That stopped her, not because it was a good argument, though it was, but because it came from a place she recognized. The place where loyalty to someone who is gone meets the practical demands of the work they left behind. She was quiet for a long time. 6 weeks, Wren said. "I need 6 weeks to finish reading the partition, map the cross-references, and build a presentation package that covers every angle. Then we send it to the right people at the same time, so nobody has a chance to suppress any of it." She looked at the filing cabinets, at the laptop, at the stacks of hard-sided cases she had not yet opened. "Who taught you to think like this?" she said. "Nobody," he said, "which is why I have to think carefully." She almost smiled. Then she settled into the work. 6 weeks. She drove out twice a week, sometimes 3 times as the preparation reached its more complex stages. She brought legal reference materials and office supplies, and occasionally food from the Covenant Diner, still warm when it arrived. Lena always packed extra, without being asked. Wren provided the workspace, the documentation, The technical analysis on the digital files. The collaboration established its own rhythm quickly. Nora was the architect of the legal strategy, understanding evidentiary standards, procedural landscape, chain of custody requirements. Wren was the one who knew the physical evidence, who had spent weeks inside the filing cabinets and the encrypted drive, who could answer specific questions about where a particular document sat in the larger structure. They did not become close exactly. They became effective, which was its own kind of relationship, built on mutual recognition of competence rather than personal history. Over those weeks, Wren learned the full depth of what the encrypted partition contained. Jonas had done more than collect evidence. He had modeled the entire scheme, tracing money flows from industrial clients through Crane's billing entities into the shell corporations, and from there into Crane's personal holding structures. The model was built on financial filings Jonas had obtained through public records requests made under assumed names, combined with documents Daniel Mercer had copied before his death. The cross-referencing work was painstaking. Wren developed a methodology that tied specific disposal transactions to specific sites through the physical samples, which was the connective tissue the prosecution package needed. He worked 12-hour days, and sometimes longer, surfacing to tend the hydroponic system, check the generators, eat whatever was in the refrigerator. Lena came on a Tuesday. Third week, Wren heard the sound through the ventilation intake. An engine. Not Frank's truck, something smaller. He went up through the hut and opened the door. And there she was, standing at the base of the rise, a worn canvas bag in one hand, the other shading her eyes against the afternoon light. It was the first time she had been out here, the first time she had left the diner for anything other than supplies in what Wren would later learn was more than 2 years. She looked at the Quonset hut, then at him, then back at the hut, as if she was trying to match what she was seeing with something she had been carrying in her head for a long time. "I brought you something," she said. She opened the canvas bag. Inside, a manila folder, not thick, 3 pages, a letter from a laboratory, and the results of a water quality test. She sat on the tailgate of the borrowed truck and told him. 6 months ago, the water from her well started tasting different. Not bad exactly, just different, a metallic edge that had not been there before. She mentioned it to her neighbor, who said his water tasted the same. She sent a sample to a testing laboratory in Casper, paid for it herself, $65 she did not easily have. The results came back. The letter was polite, clinical, language that delivers terrible news in the most measured possible tone. Elevated concentrations of trichloroethylene, benzene, chromium-6, levels that exceeded federal drinking water standards by factors she did not have the scientific background to fully understand, but understood well enough. Then she said the other thing, the thing she had not told anyone. Her husband, Ray Marsh, had died 3 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. He was 61. He had never smoked, barely drank, worked outdoors his whole life, ate well, slept well, did everything a person is supposed to do to keep their body running. The doctors could not explain it. Sometimes it just happens, they said. And she had accepted that, because what else do you do? But she had never believed it. Not entirely. Not in the place where belief actually lives, which is not the head but the gut, the part of you that knows something is wrong before you have the language to say what it is. She held the lab results in her hands, and her hands were steady, the steadiness of someone holding something that has just confirmed their worst and most private suspicion. "Jonas knew," she said. "Didn't he? That is why he stayed. That is why he never left." Wren looked at her, at the lab results, at the quiet certainty in her face. "Yes," he said. He knew. She nodded. Once, not satisfied, not relieved, just confirmed. The nod of a woman who had spent 3 years wondering why her husband died and had just been given the answer in the form of numbers on a page that she wished she had never needed to read. Wren brought the lab results down to the vault, pulled Jonas's water table data, the quarterly readings spanning 11 years, laid them side by side on the work table. The profiles matched. The same chemical signatures, the same contaminant ratios. The migration path Jonas had mapped from the 3 burial sites on the property toward the municipal aquifer was not theoretical. It was not a projection. It was happening. The contamination had reached the water table that fed Lena's well, and Lena's well drew from the same aquifer as the Covenant municipal supply. An entire county, drinking that water, cooking with it, bathing their children in it, making coffee every morning without thinking about it because water was the one thing you never had to think about. Until you did. And there was something else. Something Nora had uncovered during the weeks of preparation. A piece of the geological picture Jonas had documented, but had not fully articulated in his letters. The soil contamination was not isolated. The underlying geology showed the deposit sitting directly upstream from the main aquifer. And Crane did not simply want the land to keep a secret buried. He wanted to control the cleanup, to turn the disaster he had created into a government remediation contract worth hundreds of millions. Wren had looked at the geological map for a long time when he understood this. He had looked out through the ventilation intake toward the direction of town, where Lena poured coffee every morning, where Frank Dunbar filled his truck's radiator from a garden hose, where families turned on their taps without question. He made the work go faster after that. He was in the habitation module at 11 at night, 4th week, reading through financial disclosures on the laptop, cross-referencing shell company registration dates with disposal site acquisition records, the work that was tedious and necessary and required the kind of attention that only happens when the rest of the world has gone quiet. The motion alert triggered on his laptop. He switched to the camera grid. 2 figures on the perimeter camera, moving up the access track on foot, dark clothing, moving with the quiet of people who had done this before. He watched. They went to the hut. One stood watch while the other worked the padlock he had installed. 4 minutes to breach. Inside, their flashlight beams moved across the floor, the shelving, the cot, the welding table. They lifted the ammunition cans, checked under the cot, swept the beams along the walls. They found nothing. There was nothing to find. The hydraulic mechanism required the specific socket to activate, and the table had been relayed with authentic-looking debris. Tools arranged the way tools accumulate over years of real use. Nothing out of place. Nothing to suggest that the floor was anything other than a floor. Then one of them produced a container and poured something along the base of the eastern wall and lit it. Wren watched the fire catch and spread, the corrugated metal blackening, the concrete footing scorching. He did not move. He sat in his chair underground and watched the orange light flicker across the camera feed and felt something settle inside him. Not anger exactly, something colder, more structural, the feeling of understanding precisely what kind of people you're dealing with and what they are willing to do. The metal did not catch the way wood would have. It scorched and damaged, but did not consume. The 2 figures watched for a few minutes, then walked back down the track and disappeared into the dark. Wren waited until the perimeter camera confirmed they were gone. Then he went through the vault to the level 3 access tunnel Jonas had built, which ran underground to a point 40 feet east of the hut. He climbed up through the ground access hatch and stood in the cold Wyoming night and watched the last of the fire burn itself out along the eastern face, the stars above, indifferent, the wind carrying the smell of burned metal and accelerant, his breath visible in the cold air. He went back below. In the morning, he called Nora. She arrived 2 hours later, looked at the damage. Her expression was more resolved than alarmed. "This is his response to the legal letters," she said. "Yes, we are close enough to ready," she said. "Another week, maybe 10 days. "Can you hold 10 days? He looked at the blackened wall and thought about his grandfather, spending 13 years down here, without anyone coming to check if he was all right, without anyone bringing him coffee or asking how the work was going, without a single person in the world who knew what he was doing or why, about what it required of a person to choose that, day after day, for years. "Yes," he said. The call came on a Thursday evening, a number he did not recognize. He answered. The voice on the other end was measured, unhurried, carrying the quality of a man who had spent decades being the person in the room who did not need to raise his voice to command it. "Mr. Mercer," the voice said, "my name is Lowell Crane. I think it is time we spoke directly." Wren said nothing. "I understand you have recently come into possession of certain documents that belong to your grandfather," Crane continued. "Materials he collected over a number of years. I want you to understand that I do not hold you personally responsible. You are a young man who inherited a complicated situation. You have acted on documents provided by a man with his own grievances. That is understandable." Wren let him finish. "Because you learn things about a person by letting them talk. You learn what they think of you by the words they choose." And Crane had just told him everything. "I am prepared to resolve this cleanly," Crane said. $10 million, transferred to an account of your choosing, in exchange for the documents and a public statement clarifying that the materials were misrepresented to you, and that you have no basis for any claims that might be attributed to them. $10 million. Wren had thought about this moment. He had thought about what it would feel like to hear the number spoken aloud, whether the part of him that had grown up with nothing, the part that had eaten vending machine peanuts on a bus station bench 3 weeks ago because he could not afford anything else, whether that part would pull toward the money the way gravity pulls toward the earth. Automatic, irresistible. It did not pull. It clarified. "My grandfather turned down $10,000, Wren said. "I'm going to turn down $10 million. I would appreciate it if you did not call this number again." He ended the call. Crane called again 3 days later. Wren let it ring 4 times before picking up. And when he did, the voice on the other end was different. The words were still composed, the syntax still professional, but underneath the composure was something that had not been there before. A hairline fracture in the surface of it. The sound of a controlled person encountering the first real evidence that control might have limits. "I want to be direct with you," Crane said. The initial offer was a courtesy. "I am prepared to be significantly more generous. $25 million, a new identity, full documentation, a starting account in a jurisdiction of your choosing. You could go anywhere in the world. You could build a life that has nothing to do with Wyoming or any of this. $25 million, a new name, a new country, everything that an 18-year-old with nothing has never had and has always been told to want." Wren thought about his mother, Catherine Mercer, who had held a ledger in her hands and walked toward the truth instead of away from it, because she understood that some things, once you know them, cannot be unknown. "My grandfather built me a home," Wren said. "My parents died because of what you did. My mother was 29 years old." He paused, not for dramatic effect, because the words needed space around them, because some things you say only once, and you need to make sure you are saying them the way they deserve to be said. "Do not call this number again." He ended the call, sat at the table for a long time after that, his hands still, his breathing even. He sat with the weight of what he had just said and what it meant, not just as a refusal, but as a statement of where he stood and what he was made of. He sat with it until it settled into something he could carry without it altering his balance. Then he stood, went to the hydroponics module, spent an hour checking the systems, not because they needed checking, but because the work of tending living things was the most honest thing he knew how to do when everything else felt too large to hold. He moved through the rows, adjusting stakes, checking nutrient levels, running his hands through the basil which had grown thick and fragrant and needed cutting back to give the younger plants room. Simple work, the kind that asks nothing of you beyond attention and patience. He kept showing up. 10 days later, the package was complete. 3 separate dossiers, one for the 2 journalists Nora had identified, an investigative reporter in Denver who had been covering environmental compliance failures for 11 years, and a national correspondent in Washington with the expertise to understand the financial architecture, one for the EPA regional office in Denver, one for the state-level prosecutor in Cheyenne that Nora trusted with the specific certainty of someone who had spent 12 years learning to distinguish the clean from the compromised. The dossiers contained the core documentary evidence from Jonas's files, the financial model Wren had built from the digital partition, 3 years of water table data showing contamination migration toward Covenant's municipal supply, Lena's independent lab results, and the ledger, digitized and indexed. They worked at the vault table on the final night, Nora cross-referencing the document checklist on her laptop, Wren loading the encrypted digital packages onto 3 separate drives. The vault was cold and lit with steady functional light, and had the quality of a space where something long prepared was approaching its end. "Your father's name is in the documentation," Wren said, "in the section on the 2007 investigation. The records show he identified the right companies and the right methods before Crane shut it down. That will be in the public record once this moves." Nora was quiet for a moment. Her eyes did not leave the screen. "He deserved that," she said. "It does not fix what happened to him, but he deserved to have been right, on the record." Wren looked at the transmission interface. 3 recipient addresses, 3 upload queues, all loaded. He looked at Nora. She looked at him. Neither of them said anything. Neither of them needed to. He hit send. The upload bars filled. 3 separate transmissions, moving simultaneously through encrypted channels to 3 points in the world that Crane's network did not, as far as either of them could determine. Control. The screen showed 3 confirmations. Nora sat back in her chair, let out a long, controlled breath. Wren looked at the filing cabinets, the cases of money, the voice recorder sitting on the corner of the table where he had placed it on the first morning. He thought about the voice that had come from it, the weight of a man reaching across his own death, to hand someone else the thing he could not finish alone. "Tomorrow it begins," Nora said. Wren said nothing. He was thinking about 40,000 people, and water, and a man who had spent 13 years in the ground, making sure someone would eventually know about both. He turned off the vault light. The plants in the next module continued their quiet growing. The systems ran. The air circulators hummed. Somewhere above, Wyoming held its breath and waited for morning. The first story ran 48 hours after they sent the packages. It appeared on a Tuesday morning, published by an investigative journalist in Denver who had been covering environmental compliance failures in the Mountain West for 11 years. A woman who had built her career on patience, on documents, on the willingness to read 1,000 pages of corporate filings to find the 3 sentences that mattered. The language was careful, hedged in the way that responsible journalists hedge when they are carrying something large enough to destroy them professionally if they get it wrong. But the substance was present and specific. Shell corporations, disposal sites, a network of acquired parcels in 6 states, a CEO whose name had not appeared in print in connection with anything criminal until that morning. Wren read it on the laptop at the kitchen counter, cup of coffee going cold beside him. He read it 3 times. It was accurate. Every specific claim was supported by something in the dossier. Every number matched. Every corporate name corresponded to a filing in the cabinets downstairs. The journalist had done her own verification on top of what they had provided, which meant she believed it, which meant the work Jonas had done. The 13 years of collecting and cross-referencing and building the architecture of proof had been built well enough to survive the scrutiny of someone whose professional survival depended on being right. His phone rang. "Nora." "It is running," she said. "EPA. Denver confirmed receipt of our package yesterday evening. The prosecutor's office in Cheyenne asked me 4 specific follow-up questions this morning. You only ask those questions if you're already taking something seriously. How long before Crane responds? Wren said. By end of day, she said. She was right about the timeline. By noon, Westward Horizons had issued a statement through a public relations firm in Chicago. The language was confident, dismissive, the language of a company that had survived scrutiny before and expected to survive it again. The documents cited in the reporting were characterized as fabricated, the product of a coordinated campaign by unnamed competitors. Lowell Crane was described as a respected business leader with a decades-long record of responsible land development. The statement invited regulatory review and expressed full confidence in the outcome. Wren read the statement and felt the cold clarity of someone who had spent 6 weeks inside the documentation and knew with precision exactly how wrong every sentence of it was, every word chosen to sound reasonable, every phrase designed to make the reader feel that the accusation was the unreasonable thing, not the crime. It was a lie dressed in the language of certainty, the kind that does not deny facts directly, but surrounds them with enough confident language that the facts themselves begin to feel uncertain. Like maybe they are not facts at all. Maybe they are misunderstandings. Maybe they are the product of someone with a grudge. Wren had seen this kind of language before, not in corporate statements, in the files of foster children, the way a placement family would describe a child who was inconvenient, difficult, challenging, not adjusting well. Words that sounded clinical, professional, reasonable, and were none of those things. The second journalist published that afternoon. Based in Washington, national audience, a different approach, less hedged, more direct, the writing of someone who had reviewed the financial records with sufficient expertise to understand what they meant. The shell company network laid out in a diagram, 12 entities, the beneficial ownership structure pointing at every level to the same person. By evening, 3 more outlets had picked it up, each adding context from their own sources. Former Westward Horizons employees, environmental consultants who had worked in the affected regions, a retired EPA official who had noted irregularities in several of the relevant parcels years earlier and had been unable to build a case from what was publicly available at the time. The narrative Crane had maintained through institutional connection and legal intimidation for more than 2 decades was not crumbling in a single moment. It was disaggregating, piece by piece, each new account making the next one easier for someone to give. Former employees began speaking publicly in the second week. 3 of them, none coordinated with the others, each describing different aspects of the operation from the positions they had held. A site acquisition manager who described the shell company structure as standard procedure that no one questioned. A logistics coordinator who had arranged transportation for materials he had been told were inert fill. An environmental compliance officer who had raised internal concerns in 2009 and been dismissed 3 weeks later. Other landowners came forward. 2 families in Colorado who had sold parcels to Westward subsidiaries under pressure that had felt at the time like circumstances rather than coercion. A rancher in Montana who had noticed discoloration in a creek running through land adjacent to a former Westward site and had been told by state regulators that testing showed nothing of concern, which he had not believed and had been correct not to believe. The machinery of accountability, once it engaged, moved with a grinding deliberateness that was neither fast nor dramatic, but was thorough and did not stop. The EPA issued a public statement 8 days after the initial reporting, confirming the opening of an emergency environmental investigation into multiple land parcels in Fremont, Natrona, and Carbon counties in Wyoming, as well as sites in Colorado, Montana, Nevada, Utah, and New Mexico. The statement named Westward Horizons as a company of interest. The Wyoming Attorney General's office announced a grand jury convening 11 days after that. Nora called Wren to tell him, and her voice was quieter than he had ever heard it, held carefully. The way you hold something that has been weighted for so long that you are afraid of disturbing it, like it might turn out to be fragile, like saying it too loudly could make it less real. My father's files, she said. They are part of the public record now. The grand jury subpoena references the 2007 investigation as foundational to the current inquiry. They are treating it as the first documented attempt to expose the scheme. Wren said nothing for a moment. He was standing in the habitation module, the photograph of his mother on the desk, the blue binder on the shelf, the warm light of the ceiling strips turning the pale wood walls into something that felt like morning, regardless of what time it was. "He was right," Wren said. "The whole time. He was right." She did not respond immediately. When she did, her voice had steadied, but the steadiness was the kind that comes from holding yourself together rather than from not needing to. "Yes," she said. "He was." Wren followed all of it from below ground, checking the news each morning before turning to the day's work, which had shifted from building the prosecution package to maintaining the property and continuing the documentation of the 3 on-site disposal areas. The EPA field team would need access eventually. He wanted the record complete when they arrived. He was in the hydroponics module on a Thursday morning, tending the tomato plants, the ones Jonas had started from seed, who knows how long ago. They had been producing steadily for weeks now, small red fruits that tasted like something you would remember. He was staking a vine that had grown beyond its guide when he heard the crunch of tires on the access track through the ventilation intake. Surface camera. Frank Dunbar's truck. He climbed the stairs, crossed the hut, stepped outside. Frank was standing at the base of the rise, thermos in one hand, looking at the repaired section of the eastern wall where Wren had spent 2 days patching the fire damage with sheet metal ordered through Frank's contacts in Riverton. The patch was not pretty, but it was solid, properly fastened, sealed against weather. The work of someone who understood that function preceded appearance, and that a thing did not need to be beautiful to be right. "Decent patch job," Frank said. "It is functional," Wren said. Frank held up the thermos. "Coffee. Made too much this morning." Wren came down the rise and accepted it, poured a cup from the thermos cap and drank. It was good coffee, dark, properly made, the kind a man makes when he has been making it the same way every morning for 30 years, and has stopped thinking about it as a process and started thinking about it as a practice. They were quiet for a moment, both looking out at the land, the late morning light moving across the sage in long, slow patterns as the cloud cover shifted, the wind steady from the west, carrying the first suggestion of warmth, which in Wyoming in early spring meant the air had climbed above freezing and was considering its options. Frank's truck radio had been playing low when Wren came out. He had turned it off before getting out, but Wren had caught enough of the broadcast to know what channel it was and what was being discussed. "You heard," Wren said. Frank looked at the ground briefly, then at Wren. "Airport in Chicago," he said. "Yesterday evening. They picked him up at the gate. He had a flight to Zurich." Wren nodded. 2 passports on him. Frank continued. Radio said neither was in his name. Wren drank his coffee, the warmth of it settling into him. Not temperature. Something else. The warmth of standing next to someone who showed up with a thermos, because that was what he knew how to do. And doing what you know how to do is sometimes the most generous thing a person can offer. Frank was quiet for a moment longer. Then he set down his keys and extended his hand. Not the loose handshake of social formality. A real one, offered once, held for a moment, released. The kind that said, "I see what you did. I do not need to understand all of it. But I see it, and it matters." Wren shook it. Frank picked up his keys, got back in his truck, drove down the access road without another word, because another word was not required. Some things are said completely in the grip of a hand and the look that accompanies it, and anything added after that only dilutes what was already sufficient. Wren stood there for a while after the truck disappeared, holding the thermos, looking out at 40 acres that had been waiting, along with everything beneath it, for someone to come and do something about what it contained. Nora called that afternoon. "The grand jury has returned an indictment," she said. 37 counts, federal environmental crimes, conspiracy, wire fraud, obstruction. The obstruction counts include documentation of interference with my father's investigation in 2007. Her voice was controlled, professional, but beneath the surface was something that shook, not with weakness, with the tremor that comes from having carried something for so long that putting it down produces a physical reaction, like your body cannot quite believe the weight is gone, and keeps bracing for it. "Your father's name is in the indictment," he said. "As the original investigator." "Yes. The conduct against him is part of the obstruction record. Formally." He listened to her breathing on the other end of the line. "How does that feel?" he asked. He did not usually ask questions like that. He had spent 18 years not asking questions like that, because questions like that opened doors you could not always close. And he had learned to keep doors closed, to keep the inside inside and the outside outside and the distance between them unnavigable. But he asked it now, because he wanted to know, because Nora Caldwell had spent 12 years walking toward a moment she could not be sure would ever arrive. And it had arrived. And he wanted to know what that felt like from the inside, not from the distance of a news report or a legal filing, from the person standing in the center of it. She was quiet for a long moment, like something that was wrong for a very long time just got written down correctly, she said. "That is the only way I can describe it." He understood exactly what she meant, because he had felt it himself, in the habitation module, on the first night, when he read Jonas's letter and understood that the word surrendered did not mean what he had spent 13 years believing it meant. The feeling of a fact being corrected, not a small fact, not a detail, a foundational fact, the kind you build your whole interior architecture around, the kind that, when it changes, everything built on top of it has to be rebuilt too. It was not a comfortable feeling. It was necessary. "He was right," Wren said. "He was right," Nora said, and then she was quiet, and then said something he had not expected. "I drove past the courthouse this morning, on the way here, and I thought about him, walking into that building every morning for 2 years, believing he was doing something that mattered, and then having it taken from him, by people who had more power than he did, and more willingness to use it." She paused. "He never told me what happened. Not the details. He just stopped going to work one day and started spending a lot of time in the garage, building things, bookshelves, a birdhouse, a rocking chair my mother never sat in because it was not the right size. He was not a builder. He was a lawyer. But he needed to do something with his hands, because his hands were the only part of him that still felt useful." Wren listened, because this was not a story she had told before. He could hear it in the way the words came, slowly, testing the air, the way you test the surface of a frozen lake before you commit your weight to it. "He died thinking he had failed," she said, "and he had not failed. He had been stopped." "There is a difference, and now the difference is in the public record, and anyone who wants to can read it." Wren thought about Jonas, about Catherine, about Daniel, about Eldon Caldwell, a chain of people, each one holding a piece of something larger than themselves, each one carrying it as far as they could, and then handing it to the next person in line. His father had carried it first, his mother had carried it next, Jonas had carried it for 13 years. Eldon Caldwell had carried his own version of it for 2 years before it was taken from him, and Nora had carried the aftermath for 12 years after that. And now Wren was holding it, not alone, not as the only one, but as the current link, the one standing at the end of a chain that stretched back through 2 decades of people who had decided, one after another, that the truth was worth the cost of holding it. Lena called that evening. "Town meeting tomorrow," she said. "About the water. People are scared, people are angry, but at least they know, and knowing is better than not knowing, even when knowing hurts." She paused, then said something quieter. "Ray would have been glad," she said. "Not glad about being right about the water. glad that someone did something about it. He used to say that the worst thing in the world was not a problem. It was a problem nobody was willing to name. Wren held the phone, standing in the kitchen his grandfather had built, drinking water from the tap his grandfather had connected to a deep aquifer and triple filtered because he understood that clean water was not a luxury. It was a baseline, the thing below which nothing else functioned properly. "Thank you." "Lena," he said. He did not say what for. He did not need to. She knew, and he knew she knew, and that was enough. She said, "You come to dinner Sunday." "That is not an invitation. That is a rule." He almost smiled. He told Nora about the indictment, and they talked about next steps, the civil proceedings, the EPA timeline, the remediation schedule, the ongoing forensic accounting of Crane's network, which was producing new connections weekly as investigators followed the financial threads into corporate structures that had been designed to be invisible. The days moved forward. The season began to shift. And 5 weeks after the arrest, on a Saturday morning, Wren found what Jonas had left for last. He had been systematically clearing and organizing the vault in preparation for the EPA's formal site access visit, which Nora had scheduled for the following month. Most of the physical files had been inventoried and documented for the legal record. The cases of money had been moved to a separate area, their contents subject to legal process that Nora was navigating with the patience of someone who understood that large things moved slowly, and that slowness was not the same as failure. He was working through the last section of the work table, clearing debris, organizing tools, moving with the methodical attention he brought to everything, when his hand found the drawer. It was in the base of the central work table, a section he had registered as storage without examining closely, because the table's surface had occupied all his attention during the weeks of preparation work. He had assumed it was empty, or filled with the same kind of tools and supplies that occupied every other storage space Jonas had built. The lock was a small keyed mechanism, not a combination, a physical key. He went to the key ring hanging by the vault door, the one that held the keys to the hydroponic supply cabinet, the generator access panel, the ventilation intake cover. On the ring, a small key he had not used, labeled in the familiar hand with a single letter, J. He had no idea what J referred to. He had assumed it was a spare, a duplicate, one of those keys you keep because you cannot remember what it opens and are afraid to discard it in case you need it later. He put the key in the lock, turned it. The drawer opened. Inside was a single object, a journal, bound in brown leather, the cover worn to softness from years of handling. No label on the outside. He lifted it and felt the weight of it, the density of pages written on consistently over a long period of time. Not the weight of a book you read once and put on a shelf, the weight of something that had been picked up and opened and written in and closed and picked up again, hundreds of times, over years. He sat down at the table, opened it to the first page. The date at the top was January 2012. The handwriting was Jonas's, smaller than his other writing, more compressed, as if he had understood when he started that there would be a great deal to fit. And the space was finite. January 2012. Wren is 5 years old. He has been in the first placement for 3 weeks. The investigator's report says the family is adequate, attentive without being warm. She says Wren is adjusting. I do not know what that means for a 5-year-old who has lost his mother and been handed to strangers by his grandfather. I suspect it means he is doing what he has to do. He is my daughter's son. He will do what he has to do. Wren sat with that for a moment, then turned the page. March 2012. The investigator saw him at school pickup. Said he looks healthy. Said he has a friend, a boy named Darren, who shares his table in the classroom. I wrote the name down, Darren. I do not know why I wrote it down. It seemed important to know that he had a friend named Darren. He turned more pages. The entries were not daily, sometimes weeks apart, sometimes months, sometimes longer gaps that suggested periods where the investigator had nothing new to report, or periods where Jonas could not bring himself to write. Each one began with a date and Wren's age, and each one contained whatever the investigator had reported, followed by Jonas's own response, not narration, reaction, the private record of a man processing, in the only way available to him, information about a child he could not reach. August 2014. Wren is 8. Third placement. The second ended because the family relocated. He did not initiate the disruption, and he did not, according to the investigator, seem surprised by it. This worries me more than if he had cried. A child who expects to be moved has learned something about the world that is very difficult to unlearn. I want to drive to California. I remind myself that I cannot. Not yet. Not safely. The word yet is doing a great deal of work in that sentence, and I know it. Wren read slowly. The light in the vault was cold and steady. The air circulators ran their quiet cycles. The rest of the complex hummed around him, patient, functional, indifferent to the fact that the man sitting at this table was reading a document that was dismantling everything he had believed about himself, one entry at a time. November 2016. Wren is 10. He has been teaching himself mechanical repair from books he checks out of the school library. The investigator mentioned it in passing. As a minor curiosity, I read that line 4 times. He finds his way to the things that make sense to him. That is Catherine's mind. Her instinct for following what is real and useful rather than what is comfortable or convenient. I am glad. I am also aware of how complicated gladness is at this distance. April 2019. Wren is 13. He was in a fight at school. The report says he defended another student who was being bullied. He was suspended for 3 days. The foster family at the current placement made it a difficult week for him. I wish I could tell him that he did the right thing, and the consequence was unjust. I have no way to tell him anything. I light the stove and I sit here and I talk to the air sometimes, which I recognize is not a thing a sane person does. I do it anyway. Wren stopped on that page for a long time. He thought about a man sitting alone in an underground room, talking to the air, because there was no other available way to reach a 13-year-old boy in a suburb of Sacramento who had just served a 3-day suspension for protecting someone smaller than himself. Talking to the air, because the alternative was silence, and silence meant accepting that the distance was absolute, and Jonas Harlan had refused to accept that, even when the evidence suggested he should. He talked to the air instead. September 2021. Wren is 15. 7th placement. I asked the investigator directly this time, "Is he all right?" She said, "He is functional," which is the word people use when they mean that a person has learned to require nothing from the world, and so cannot technically be said to be failing. I told her I needed more than functional. She said that was the best assessment available from the outside. I thanked her, paid her fee, sat here for 3 hours without doing anything productive. He is 15 and has been in 7 homes. I have been 1,100 miles away in a hole I dug myself, and I tell myself every year that it is protective, and every year I believe it a little less. Not because it is not true, because believing something true does not make it not cost what it costs. I will not contact him, not yet. It is not safe yet. I am aware of how much the word yet is doing in that sentence. Wren's throat was tight, not the tightness of sadness exactly, something more structural, the feeling of a wall coming down that had been load-bearing. That had been holding up the ceiling of every room he had ever lived in. And now, the wall was coming down, and the ceiling was not falling, because the wall had never been holding it up. He had never been alone. He had believed he was alone. He had built everything on that belief, his independence, his self-sufficiency, his ability to walk into any new place and need nothing from anyone. He had thought that was strength, and in some ways it was, but the foundation of it, the reason he had built it, was wrong. He had not been alone. He had been watched, imperfectly, at enormous distance, by a man sitting in an underground room, paying an investigator to report details, writing those details in a brown leather journal, because writing them down was the only thing he could do with them. Every placement, every year, every small fact about his life that a private investigator could observe from the outside and report back. A friend named Darren, a fight at school, books about mechanical repair checked out from a library, all of it written down, in a journal, in a drawer, in a vault, under a shed, on 40 acres of Wyoming, by a man who had chosen to know, even when knowing was the only thing he was allowed to do. He turned to the last entry, September 2024. Ren will be 18 in 6 weeks. I have instructed Nora Caldwell to hold the estate notification until his birthday. Everything is ready. The systems are running well. The hydroponics need attention in the basal section. The vault documentation is complete. The encrypted partition has everything cross-referenced. I have been doing this for 13 years. I am tired in the way that a machine is tired when it has been running at high capacity for longer than its specified design load. Not broken, just at the limit. I do not know if he will come. I do not know if he will read the letters, or turn down the money, or choose to stay. I built all of this, hoping he would. But hoping and knowing are different things, and I have been honest with myself about that from the beginning. He may look at a tin shed on 40 acres of Wyoming and see exactly what it appears to be. Nothing. But I have watched him for 13 years. I have watched him move through 7 homes without losing whatever it is that he is made of. I have watched him teach himself things in libraries and defend other people's children and make decisions without anyone to consult. He is Catherine's son. He is also, I allow myself to think, something that I had some part in. However far away, if you are reading this, Ren, then you came. And if you came, then you stayed long enough to find this, which means you already know what you chose to do, and I already know I was right to believe you would choose it. I am proud of you, not for what you have done, though I expect by now you have done something worth being proud of. I am proud of you for surviving the 13 years before any of this. That belonged entirely to you. Take care of the plants. The basil needs thinning. The entry ended there. Ren closed the journal. He sat at the table in the cold vault for a long time, the journal in his hands, not moving. The air circulators ran. The lights held steady above him, somewhere in the module above. The refrigerator hummed. Beyond that, the grow lights in the hydroponics module sustained the plants Jonas had started from seed, tended, and left running on their automated schedule. Still growing, still productive, still alive. The stone in the center of his chest, the one he had been carrying since he was 6 years old, the one he had built everything around, the one that said you were let go on purpose and you were not worth staying for, and the world does not hold on to you, so you had better learn to hold on to yourself. It was still there. It had not gotten lighter, but it had changed what it meant. It was not the stone of abandonment anymore. It was the stone of distance. The weight of 13 years of separation that had been chosen not because he was unloved, but because he was loved in the only way the man who loved him could manage, from far away, in silence, through a private investigator, through a journal no one was meant to read, until the man who wrote it was gone. He set the journal on the table, stood, went up through the complex and out of the hut and into the Wyoming afternoon. The season had changed while he was underground. It was spring now, and spring in Wyoming does not ease in gradually. It arrives abruptly, cold mornings carrying the smell of snowmelt from the draws, afternoons that hold the first real warmth in months. The light was different from what he had encountered when he first arrived. It reached further, had more intention to it, light that was beginning to remember what warmth felt like, and was practicing. He stood on the rise above the hut and looked out over 40 acres. The land was greening slowly at the lower elevations, the sage putting out new growth, a hawk moving in long, patient circles above the eastern fence line, riding the thermals without effort, which is not the same as without skill. It takes a great deal of skill to make something difficult look effortless. The hawk knew this, and did not care whether anyone noticed. 20 miles east, invisible from here, Covenant was going about its day, the municipal water system drawing from an aquifer that would take years of remediation to fully clear, a process the EPA had now formally committed to, funded in part by the civil judgments working through the federal courts against what remained of the Westward Horizon's corporate structure. It would not be fast. The people of Covenant would live with the uncertainty for years, the bottled water deliveries, the testing schedules, the town meetings where someone would stand up and ask when will it be safe? And the answer would be the answer that is always given when large damage is being slowly repaired. We are working on it. It is going to take time. But it was happening. The machinery had engaged, and the evidence that had put it in motion had been collected and preserved and protected by one man in a room beneath this exact piece of ground for 13 years, because he had decided that someone should know, and that the someone should eventually be Wren. He went back inside and called Nora. He told her about the journal. She listened without interrupting, which he appreciated. He told her about the entries, the dates, the ages, the investigators' reports, the way Jonas had written his own responses to the reported facts. Not analysis, not commentary, just a man reacting to information about a child he could not reach, processing it in the only way available to him, through a pen, on paper, in a drawer. When he finished, she said quietly, "He was watching you the whole time." "Yes," Wren said. "He knew you would come," she said. "He told me," Wren said. "In the last entry, he said he believed I would choose it," she said gently. He was right. Lena's Sunday dinners became a rule, not an invitation, a rule. She said it once and did not repeat it, and did not need to. Wren showed up the first Sunday at 6. She had made pot roast and mashed potatoes and green beans from a jar, and the coffee was already on. The table was set for 2, with real plates, the kind that have weight to them, the kind that say this meal matters enough to use the good ones. They did not talk much during the first dinner, which suited both of them. Lena was the kind of woman who understood that presence was its own form of conversation, and that silence between two people who had earned the right to be comfortable in each other's company was worth more than most words. After dinner, she showed him a photograph on the wall above the kitchen door. Ray Marsh, a broad-faced man with kind eyes and the suntan of someone who worked outdoors 12 months a year. He was standing next to a fence post he had just set, holding a level, grinning. "He set every post on this property himself," Lena said. 240 posts, and he checked every single one with that level. Because he said a fence that is not straight is a fence that does not respect the land it is standing on. Wren looked at the photograph, at the man in it, at the level in his hand, at the grin that said he was exactly where he was supposed to be, doing exactly what he knew how to do. "He would have liked you," Lena said. "He liked people who showed up and did the work without being asked." Wren did not say anything, but he came back the next Sunday, and the one after that. Nora began stopping by the property when she had legal business to discuss, updates on the civil proceedings, the remediation schedule, the ongoing forensic accounting of Crane's network. But sometimes she came when there was no legal business. She brought her laptop and worked at the kitchen counter, while Wren worked in the vault or the hydroponics module. They did not need to be in the same room, but they had developed the habit of proximity, the kind that grows between people who have been through something together that nobody else fully understands. Wren spent his evenings sketching. The cabin was taking shape on paper. Small, practical, built from materials he could source through Frank's contacts in Riverton. Post and beam, a single room with a sleeping loft, a porch facing west toward the sunset. He had Jonas's technical library. He had time. He had the patience that develops in a person who has spent 18 years learning to work with whatever is actually available rather than what should be available. The land trust contact Nora had identified was an organization working on aquifer protection in the Fremont County region. The geological surveys Jonas had compiled were exactly the kind of documentation they needed, and rarely had access to. Wren had a meeting scheduled for the following week to discuss long-term monitoring, watershed protection, the kind of slow, unglamorous work that does not make headlines but keeps the water clean for the people who come after you. He went to the hydroponics module after dinner on what he decided, without ceremony, without announcement, was the last evening of the story he had been living in since the day Patterson slid a manila envelope across a scratched desk. The basil needed thinning. Jonas had said so in the recording, and the plants themselves confirmed it. With their crowded, competing growth, too many stems in too little space, each one reaching for light, each one taking what the others needed. Wren worked through the section carefully, removing what was overgrown, to give the remaining plants room, and air, and the space they needed to become what they were capable of becoming. It was simple work, the kind that asked nothing of you beyond attention and patience. His hands moved through the fragrant green growth, and the warm, humid air of the module carried the smell of it everywhere. Sharp, alive, the smell of something growing because the conditions were right, and someone had taken the time to make them right. He thought about Jonas, doing this same work, in this same room, for 13 years, tending plants he had started from seed, watching them grow, harvesting what they produced, planting again, the daily invisible labor of maintaining a system that was designed to sustain a life. Not his life, someone else's. He thought about Lena, standing behind her counter every morning, pouring coffee for people who had no idea what was in their water, carrying the knowledge of what had happened to Ray, quietly, without bitterness, with the grace of a woman who had decided that grief was not the same as surrender, and that continuing was its own form of courage. He thought about Nora, 12 years of building a career that pointed toward a moment she could not guarantee would arrive. And it had arrived. And she had been ready, because she had spent every one of those 12 years making sure she would be. He thought about Catherine, 29 years old, brave in the way that had cost her everything, and had by the long and indirect route of 13 years of one man's patient work produced something that might last longer than any of them had expected. He finished thinning the basil, moved along the rows, adjusted a support stake on a tomato vine that had grown beyond its guide, noted that the lettuce in the third tier was ready to cut. He had never grown anything before coming here, never had the continuity that growing required, the confidence that you would be in the same place long enough to see something through from planting to harvest. That confidence had not been available to him for the first 18 years of his life. It was available now. He turned off the grow lights in the section he had finished, left the rest running on their cycle, the way Jonas had designed it, the way the binder specified, the way the system had been running for 13 years and would continue running, because it had been built by someone who understood that the things you build to last must be able to outlast your own ability to tend them. He descended into the habitation module. Warm light, shelves of paperbacks, kitchen that smelled faintly of the dinner he had made from vegetables he had grown in a room his grandfather had built. He sat at the desk, picked up the brown leather journal, held it for a moment without opening it, then opened it to the last page, read the last entry one final time, read the last line. I am proud of you for surviving the 13 years before any of this. That belonged entirely to you. He set the journal down, looked at the photograph of his mother, who had been 29 years old, and brave in the way that had cost her everything, and had by the long and indirect route of one man's patient work produced something that might last longer than any of them had expected. 40 acres of Wyoming ground, his grandfather's life's work, his mother's unfinished sentence, finally completed. He turned off the desk lamp. In the hydroponics module, the grow lights continued their cycle. The pumps moved water through the trays. The plants grew in their rows, unhurried, certain, doing the simple and profound thing that properly tended living systems do, which is to continue. Outside, on the rise above the Quonset hut. The Wyoming night moved across 40 acres of land that had held its secrets long enough, and was beginning, slowly, in the way that land always does, to simply be what it was: ground,